All right, so for the past couple weeks, I've been using this camera right here. This is the KANDAO, I believe it's called KANDAO QooCam 3. This is a 360 camera. And if you guys know or are familiar with my channel, you guys know I talk about this one a lot, Insta360 X3. So since they did send me the camera, a couple of accessories and batteries, and they did sponsor the video, I did want to let them know and let you guys know too, all the stuff that I'm talking about in the video are all the pros and cons that I've found out after using these cameras or this camera for the past couple weeks. So in this video, let's go through all those things, the design, the weight, the user experience, the durability of this camera, as well as, of course, the most important thing, the quality of the camera compared to this one here, the X3. Now, the first we'll talk about is the size. Now, if you look at these side by side, of course, you can see that the QooCam is definitely a lot bigger than the X3. And also, if you put these on the side, you can see the X3 is slimmer than the QooCam. And the positioning of the camera is a little bit different too. The QooCam does have that offset camera where you can see one that's a little bit lower than this one right here. And then here on the X3, they are able to make it a little bit smaller of a package because they are putting the cameras back to back. Now, as far as feel and build quality of the QooCam, I can say that it does feel pretty robust. It does feel solid. It doesn't feel like a cheap kind of plasticky type of action camera that some of the other ones have out there. It does feel solid, and the texture very similar to the X3, where it does have some texture on the front, and here on the sides it does have that rubber feel. Next, we'll talk about touchscreen. As you can see here, both of these cameras do have nice large touchscreens. The QooCam has a 1.9-inch touchscreen, and here on the X3 we do have a larger 2.29-inch touchscreen on the very front. Now, jumping back to the camera on the QooCam, we do have a little bit larger of a sensor, a 1/1.5-inch sensor, where here on the X3 we do have a 1/2-inch sensor. Next, we'll talk about aperture, and we actually do have a larger aperture on the QooCam, an f1.6, where here on the X3 we do have an f1.9. Now, having that larger aperture is definitely beneficial in certain scenarios. However, there was one downside, I think, that's happening to some of my footage on the QooCam, and we'll talk a little bit about that once we put some side-by-side footage. Now, being 360 cameras, of course, video resolution is a big deal. Both these cameras shoot 5.7K at up to 30 frames a second. And when it comes down to photos, we do have a 72 megapixel here on the X3 versus a 62 megapixel on the QooCam 3. Now, with 360 cameras, there's definitely a lot of use cases for it. For me, I normally use it either as a behind-the-scenes type of camera, or if I'm out there shooting something like snowboarding with my kids, I will stick this camera on a stick just like this, hold it out there, and it's recording everything, which is great because if it is recording everything, all you have to do is hit record and know that in post-processing or in the video editing app, you can just turn that camera around and have it point to me, and I can turn it again and point to my kid that's skiing, and then turn the camera again and point to my kid over here that's skiing. You're able to make all those angle or different angle adjustments in post-processing, and you're able to do that all from shooting one clip out of your 360 cameras versus a standard action camera, which is only pointed in one direction. Now, next, let's talk about image quality of these two cameras right here. And like I mentioned earlier, the QooCam does have a little bit larger of an aperture, but I like to shoot with these types of cameras in auto for the most part, because of the fact that when you're mounting a 360 camera to something, whether it's a pole or whether it's your car or a bike, the sun position, it's always going to be changing. You're always going to be moving around. You're going to be going in and out of shadows. So I like to, of course, put a lot of these, as far as exposure goes, in auto. And when I'm shooting in auto on both of these, the QooCam does seem to be a little bit more overexposed compared to the X3. It might just be an auto setting that QooCam might be able to dial down a bit or increase the shutter speed, because it does seem like it's shooting a little bit hot compared to the X3. Now, having that wider aperture in lower light scenarios, that's where the KANDAO will do a lot better than the X3. But for me, most of the things I am shooting normally in 360 is going to be during the day, whether it's action sports or mounting it in my car. I'm not normally doing that stuff at night or in low light. After taking these into the snow and actually crashing with both of these cameras, just letting you know that they are pretty rugged, and as far as waterproofing goes, they can both go down about 33 feet. Next, we'll talk about battery life. Now, the QooCam 3 does have a 1600 milliamp battery, and the X3 has a little bit larger 1800 milliamp battery. Now, when I was out there snowboarding, the one thing I did notice on the QooCam battery is that it did deplete a lot faster than the Insta360 battery. I'll go down for a run with a fully charged battery, and by the end of the run, it'll give me about a bar, maybe 2 bars towards the end of that run, and I'm assuming it's because of just cold weather. Next, we'll talk about user experience of both these cameras, and for me, that's probably one of the biggest categories to take in consideration. And for the most part, dealing with KANDAO's interface, it was not confusing at all if you are used to any action camera. Pretty much looks and feels very similar to the menus that you would get on a GoPro or a DJI Action. Now, the one thing I was looking for on the QooCam versus the X3 was the QooCam does not have the single lens option. So here on the X3, which I actually like, is that you are able to go from the dual cam, which means you're shooting 360, over into a single cam mode or single lens mode, which means if you wanted just to go into single lens, hit there, and now you're able to just use the camera as a single lens and you're able to shoot in 4K. Again, that might be an option that QooCam does not have currently, but it would be nice to add on the ability to just use one camera at a higher resolution instead of just always shooting 360 the entire time. That larger aperture on the QooCam 3 will be very beneficial, especially when you're shooting indoors. Now, when it comes down to previewing and downloading your video footage, they both have their own app. So the QooCam or KANDAO has their own app for the QooCam 3 as well as Insta360. They have their app for the X3. Now, for me, when I normally edit, I will download everything to my desktop and try to do everything through the desktop application. And luckily enough, they both have Mac software that you can use for both these cameras. Now, the one thing I did notice with Insta360's app, which I actually really like, is their AI tracking. That's something that the QooCam software does not offer. And for those who aren't familiar with the AI tracking, it's basically an easier way for you to select a subject. So for me, when I was editing the snowboard footage, I was actually just shooting back towards me. And with the AI tracking, all you have to do is select the subject or select me and just hit start tracking, and the software will start tracking that subject automatically. And finally, when it comes down to the price, the KANDAO QooCam 3 comes in at $349, about $100 more affordable than the Insta360 X3. So if budget was something that you are constrained with, just know that the QooCam 3 is a little bit more affordable. However, I think the one thing that they need to work on, or KANDAO needs to work on a little bit more, is just tweaking and fine-tuning their software. I think there's small things that they can make adjustments to, whether it be, like I mentioned earlier, a little bit of the overexposing on the auto mode. They can bring up the shutter speed to possibly bring down that overexposure. And when it comes down to desktop and editing software, the Insta360 software is definitely a lot more mature than the QooCam 3. Also, when it comes down to camera positioning, as you can see here, there is less space in between the two cameras compared to the QooCam, which means your stitch line will be a little bit cleaner on the X3. And also, like I talked about earlier, the mobile app and the desktop, I think is a little bit more refined as far as the UI and the options you have in Insta360's app versus the QooCam app. And there it is, guys, just a bunch of pros and cons of both these cameras, the QooCam 3 as well as the X3. As always, if you guys got some value from this video, a big like would be much appreciated. This is Ultra Stasio with FlytPath.com. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.